administration's repeated invoking of national security to maintain secrecy in terms of what happened with some of these torture cases?
Right. That's happening in two different contexts. One is the Freedom of Information Act context. There are still half a dozen lawsuits out there, including some that the ACLU has brought, that are an effort to create a complete public record of what took place under the last administration. Rather than cooperate with that effort, the administration, the Obama administration, is invoking national security to withhold, for example, allegations from prisoners who are held in CIA black sites about the treatment that they suffered in those black sites. And at this point, there is no legitimate national security justification for withholding that kind of material. So that's one context. And the other context is in the context of civil suits brought by survivors of the torture program. What you see is the administration invoking the same state secrets privilege that the last administration invoked to get those cases kicked out of court. So on every front, you see the Obama administration, rather than providing the kind of accountability that it committed to provide, instead obstructing accountability.
What about the whole issue of the continued rise of the surveillance state and the government's involvement in surveillance of citizens?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's another front where we had hoped to see this administration depart from the policies of the last administration, and it hasn't happened, or at least hasn't happened to the extent we had hoped. Some of what was going on under the last administration was going on in spite of federal law that prohibited it. That was true, for example, of the warrantless wiretapping program. And then Congress authorized the warrantless wiretapping that President Bush had authorized in violation of statute. So now you have a statute that that authorizes precisely what President Bush was doing illegally in between 2001 and 2006. But what we had hoped was that that statute would be tested, the constitutionality of that statute would be tested in the courts. Rather than defend the statute on the merits, or even better, concede the unconstitutionality of the statute, the Obama administration has invoked the state secrets privilege and the standing doctrine to try to protect that statute from judicial review. And the standing argument they're making is that the only people who can challenge this kind of surveillance are people who can prove that their own communications were acquired. And nobody can prove that their own communications were acquired because the administration doesn't, often for good reason, doesn't disclose the names of its surveillance targets. So to say that the only people who can challenge the statute are people who can show their communications were acquired under it is to say that the statute is immune from judicial review. And that's the problem with the argument that the administration is making right now.
Jamil Jaffer, the issue of U.S. policy of assassination, ACLU, Center for Constitutional Rights, filed suit last week against the government around the government's authorization of assassinating U.S. citizens, al-Awlaki in Yemen.
That's right. That's right. So this is, this targeted killing program, as it's been called, is something that was introduced by the last administration, but expanded by this administration. And our concern is principally with the use of, with the carrying out of targeted killings outside the battlefield context. So it's one thing to use drones, for example, in Afghanistan or Iraq, where the United States is actually at war. That's subject to the laws of war, and there are limits, but that's a different context than the use of drones to kill people who are located far from any battlefield. And a lot of us agreed that the last administration's argument for worldwide detention authority, the authority to detain people without charge or trial, was extreme and unlawful. This administration is claiming worldwide execution authority. Suspected terrorists are targeted for execution wherever they are in the world. And that's, there are many problems with that policy, but one of them is that inevitably we will get it wrong sometimes. And you only need to look to Guantanamo, for example, to see dozens and dozens of situations where we initially labeled somebody a terrorist and then many years later looked at the evidence and found that the evidence was non-existent or just wrong. And it's one thing to get it wrong in the context of detention. With detention, there's always the possibility of appeal and the possibility eventually of release. But there is no appeal from a drone. And if you get it wrong with a drone, there is no recourse. So we have to be sure to get it right, and that's part of the reason reason we're so concerned about the use of these drones outside the battlefield context.
And you're also critical of the Obama administration's willingness to rely on military commissions in terms of dealing with some of the suspected or alleged terrorists.
That's right. I mean, with the military commissions, I mean, I'll be honest with you. It's not just a civil liberties objection. It's also a very practical effectiveness objection, and it's bewildering to us that the administration is going down this road. You have military commissions that have been totally unsuccessful in carrying out the task that they were told to carry out. Over the last few years, we've had 4 convictions, in the same time period, you've had hundreds of convictions in the criminal courts here inside the United States. The courts here, the federal courts, are completely capable of handling complex terrorism cases. They've done it many, many times in the past. The prosecutors know the law. There is law. The judges know the law. Everybody knows the rules, and those rules have been tested over many, many years. In the military commissions, you have a system that's been built essentially from scratch, and it's no surprise that that system has, to understate it, many, many kinks in it. And the result is that this system that the Obama administration is using has all kinds of human rights and civil liberties problems, but it also has a very basic effectiveness problem. And so our objection to it is not just a civil liberties objection, but a kind of security objection as well.
We only have 20 seconds, but opening arguments begin in Omar Khadr's case today in Guantanamo, picked up at 15.
Yeah, this is in some ways the most troubling of all of the cases that have been brought before the military commission. He was, as you say, picked up as a juvenile. He's been held for a third of his life at Guantanamo. He's being held on the basis of, among other things, evidence that was tortured out of him when he was 15 years old. It's a surprise that the Obama administration is starting with this case.
Gibbs is concerned about you comparing Obama with Bush. What about Bush Sr.? Do you think the comment about the professional left is equivalent to President George H.W. Bush talking about card-carrying members of the ACLU?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I'm not even sure that we consider ourselves part of the left at the ACLU. You know, we consider ourselves having the Bill of Rights as our right. Again, I just think it's disappointing that the administration uses this kind of language to respond to thoughtful and considered criticism. I think that debases political discourse in this country, and part of the press secretary's job is to make sure that political discourse is civil and informed.
Jamil Jaffer, I want to thank you very much for being with us. His report on the new normal, establishing a new normal, national security, civil liberties, and human rights under the Obama administration. We'll link to it at democracynow.org. When we come back, we're going to talk about the mosque controversy near Ground Zero. We'll be speaking with one of those directly involved, and then looking at mosque controversies around the country. It's not just here in New York. Stay with us.